Okay, here we go with Freud's theory of psychosexual development. He's considered the father of psychology and has some pretty interesting theories about a person's development. So let's begin. Sorry for all the zooming. Here we go. Freud's theory. Have you ever heard of a Freudian slip? How about noting that a structure is phallic? Are you familiar with the term fixated? If so, then you're referencing these classic stages by understanding them, we'll be able to make the illusions yourself. Freud believed that we all go through biological stages, which are determined from birth through adulthood. The development is driven by sexual instinct. Freud believes that people are driven by the sex instinct or the death instinct. As humans, we either want to reproduce and procreate, or we want to kill something, including ourselves. Those are the only two instincts that we work by, so says Freud. So you can see he's very controversial, which led to a variety of opposing theories, and we'll get to those later. But he's still a good place to start as far as these classical terms are concerned. So, what's considered maladaptive according to Freud? Adult behavior that's maladaptive could be traced to these stages, as we'll see in just a moment. His theory says that unresolved conflicts are the source of this maladaptive behavior, and unsuccessful resolution or interference can cause the dysfunction. So what is fixation? Conflict during any stage could lock or fixate a person's pleasure-seeking energy in that stage. Again, it's very tricky to assume that smoking, for example, is an oral fixation and results because of unresolved conflict at age 0 to 18 months, but it's his theory. Okay, so what are our stages? We have oral, anal, phallic, latent, and genital. Now, this gets pretty tricky, so pay attention, and here we go. So to begin with, Freud says we begin at the oral stage, which happens between 0 and 18 months. The focus here is sexual pleasure satisfied by sucking, biting, and chewing instincts. The fixations that could occur: smoking, pencil chewing, fingernail biting, gum chewing, excessive eating, anything focused on the mouth area. If this oral stage isn't successfully completed, these fixations or maladaptivities can occur. For example, if a mom nursed a baby until age 2 or more years, and then the child develops a smoking habit to continue that stimulation as an adult, if you're Freudian, you would say that there's this fixation in the oral stage because that pleasure zone needs to constantly be activated. Okay. Now, when we say sexual pleasure for an infant, we're obviously not talking about the arousal, sexual arousal, but if you think most of an infant's stimulation, right, at that age is coming from the mouth area. We're kissing on them. They're learning to eat. They're learning to bite when they start teething. Of course, nursing or feeding by bottle. So it's the pleasure zone for the kid at the time. And so that's what we're talking about. The pleasure is there. And if a person isn't successfully weaned, shall we say, or doesn't successfully move to the next stage knowing that it's time to give up some of this stuff, those fixations could occur later in life. So the oral stage. Then Freud says we move on to the anal stage, which happens between 1.5 years and 3 years old. The focus here is toilet training, which typically occurs. New sensations must be acknowledged in this region of the body. So we're talking a person's lower extremities. The fixation here: adults that are messy and disorganized could be considered anal expulsive, or if they're highly controlled and compulsive, which is anal retentive. Maybe you guys have heard that before. So if potty training goes smoothly, right, there's no threats. It just happens when a child is ready. Mom and dad are very supportive. There's no shaming. There's no embarrassing episodes, in public especially. Then a person should be able to take care of toilet training perfectly fine and move on and not have any of these fixations. But if during potty training those things do occur, right, they're hollered at, they're yelled at, they're embarrassed, they're ashamed, they're made for it to be a stressful situation, then that's going to be something that could translate into their adult life. Okay? Bathroom habits are also something Freud says that is one part of a child's life at that time that he or she can control. Mom and dad control everything else: sleeping, dressing, waking, activities, all that good stuff. So if bathroom habits are something that a child can control, he or she very quickly learns to manipulate this. And that's a whole nother discussion, but it certainly does happen. So, for example, if a child is not completely independent with bathroom needs or use until age 5 or older, the continuous need for mom and dad to help or use diapers or pull-ups is a control mechanism. Mom and dad comply, and the kid can control them. So they can get very manipulative in this situation. The opposite could happen, and rather than being uptight and controlled, the person is very explosive, right? They're very disorganized, they're very messy. In other parts of their life, that could be an opposite effect of not successfully managing this stage of life, okay? On the flip side, the potty training experience is successful. There's no threats, shaming, embarrassment, or stress, and the child will become appropriately independent. Okay, so the anal stage, pretty important in a person's development, according to Freud. So then we move on to the phallic stage. Between ages 3 and 6 years old, the focus here is that the person is discovering the genitals and develop unconscious sexual desire for the parent of the opposite sex. Could develop jealousy or hatred for the same-sex parent. The fixation that could occur, gender identity choices, gender role confusion, sexual predators, sexual deviance, the choice of mate resembles mom or dad. Now, this is kind of hard to wrap our heads around, okay, because we don't typically think of 3 to 6 year olds as being very sexual beings, and they shouldn't be. So when we're saying sexual desire, it's again not that sort of adult, mature arousal and desire that we would think of. It's just that in these years, as young children, you know, they're learning the good touch, bad touch stuff. They're learning different regions of their body and how it functions, and new pleasure zones and that sort of thing. So it's a very primal sexual desire, if you will. And so girls are learning what it's like to have the girl parts and the girl behavior, and boys are learning about boy parts and boy behavior and that sort of thing. And there's two things that happen here as far as complexes are concerned, and we'll get to those in a second. So then if a person during these years, again, is shamed or threatened or told to be embarrassed about his or her desires and body parts, some of these fixations could occur, right? If abuse happens at this stage, that could be pretty devastating and lead to some other fixations as well. So this is a real tricky stage too, because that biology starts to kick in a little bit. So here are some examples. If there's no shame or embarrassment or insults or fear, but proper acceptable behavior is taught about body parts and sexual feelings, that's what we're aiming for. So the kids understand and can act appropriately without being shamed or scared into doing or not doing something. So that's where you want to be. Here are some things that Freud says has to happen. With males, there's something called an Oedipus complex. Does anybody know what the reference is to Oedipus? Do 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 do. If you said Greek mythology, you're correct. Oedipus in Greek mythology was a man who unknowingly married his mother, and when he found out, he scratched his eyes out. It's a big long story. It's not as bad as it sounds, but it's termed the Oedipus complex here because Freud says the boys learn to fear the father because of the boy's feelings for the mother. Okay, a mother is typically the first exposure a young boy has to females and what it's like to express love and proper touching and cuddling and that sort of thing. And so if he starts realizing that there's this sort of desire of sorts aroused, again, not sexual, but that affectionate, you know, childlike desire, how to deal with that. So if dad, you know, and dad now is a threat because there's another male in the house that's also having those same desires. Okay, so Oedipus complex. In the female version, it's called the Electra crisis. Anybody know that reference? I don't remember either. We'll have to look it up. But here, the girls are competing with the mother for affection from the father. Okay? So again, girls are learning appropriately how to behave with men and how they should behave. A mother and a father should behave together and so forth. So they have to work out their own feelings of jealousy and competition for affection and attention from dad. So you can see there's a lot going on, and Freud says so much of this happens subconsciously, and it should, that it's also crucial that conversations are happening and parents are very attentive to what's going on, because kids are super, super vulnerable at this particular stage. So there you go. Okay, then we move on to the latent stage, which is ages 6 to 12 roughly and beyond. The focus here is to repress sexual urges and deal with changing body hormones. Welcome to middle school. Fixations that can occur, gender identity issues could surface, self-esteem issue is huge, self-mutilation might start occurring as well. Okay, so if you think back to those lovely years between the ages of 9 and 12 and beyond, it was pretty difficult, I think. And so Freud says that we have to, again, these sexual urges are occurring. Now you've got hormones that are involved with puberty, so bodies are physically changing. What your classmates and your friends looked like at, age 5, 6, 7 changes by the time they're 10, 11, 12. All those stages we just went through have now sort of culminated in this stage, and we have to learn how to appropriately express feelings and urges and deal with your own body changes and that sort of thing. And if that stuff isn't handled very delicately, it can lead to some pretty serious self-harming behaviors. Okay? The genital stage goes from puberty roughly into adulthood, says Freud. The focus here is the maturing sexual interests, figuring out desire versus morals, and seeking out safe and gratifying sexual experiences. If that stuff isn't successfully handled, the fixations could be sexual deviancy or avoidance of sex, struggling with long-term commitment to romantic relationships. So once those hormones kick in, and then we have our maturing ideas of desire and attraction to others and so on, all of our morals come into play, our social experiences and so forth. And so a healthy person is going to develop these mature ideas and line them up with morals and seek out safe experiences rather than not. So this is a good one sort of to wrap things up and what all those other stages are working towards. So that's a very, very brief overview of Freud's psychosexual development theory. And we'll continue with his work in the next lecture.